Hello, this is America, and that over there is Congress, the body with the sole power to declare war. But it hasn't done it since World War II, and yet the United States has been at war with Iran. Now, there is a crucial countdown clock about to run out, and Republicans who control that House are getting worried about upcoming elections. We're going to have more on that shortly, but first to our Washington studio and Cyril Vanier.
Phil Lavelle, thank you very much. The War Powers Resolution gives the president the right to deploy troops for just 60 days. That deadline expires in 1 week's time. And the political headwinds for both Donald Trump and Republicans are getting stronger. Support for the war is slipping. Trump's approval is in the firing line. The party's approval has already tanked. Republican lawmakers are under scrutiny over how long they will keep supporting a war that has not been authorized by Congress. The costs are high. The military has asked for an extra $200 billion. And for the American voter, the knock-on effect is real on the cost of living, on gas prices. Polling shows the disapproval of Congress is 86%. That is tied for record-high disapproval. But from the start of the war, most Republicans on Capitol Hill have thrown their support behind Donald Trump.
After 60 days, any military operation not approved by the Congress must come to an end. That's just blatantly unconstitutional. That creates 535 commander-in-chiefs. The Constitution designates the president as the commander-in-chief, not for 60 days, but forever how long it takes to be commander-in-chief.
We are not at war. We have no intention of being at war. The President and the Department of Defense have made this very clear. The Department of War has made it very clear. This is a limited operation. It would have been a very dangerous gambit to take the Commander-in-Chief's ability away to complete this mission. It would have been a very serious misstep by Congress.
So Donald Trump used his power as commander-in-chief to deploy troops and launch attacks on Iran. But you heard there, that raises a question about whether this is constitutional. On Capitol Hill, Phil Lavelle explains who has the power to declare war.
See that? That is Congress, and this is the Constitution. It is America's original rule book. But how that place and these pages fit together, especially amidst the war in Iran, well, that is on the minds of both Republicans and Democrats right now, both sides of the political aisle. So let's break it all down, starting with question number one. What is the role of Congress? Well, quite simply, it is to hold the executive branch to account. And by executive branch, we mean the president, in this case, Donald J. Trump. But when it comes to war, the Constitution says only Congress can declare it. That is Congress, not the White House. Here's a list of the times in history it has been used. First in 1812 against Great Britain, most recently 1942 against these three countries. But there is a war with Iran right now. So what's going on? That takes us to point number two. Did Congress give approval? Well, short answer, no, it didn't. Which takes us neatly to point number three. Is Congress being bypassed? Well, therein lies the issue, and it's largely split along party lines. See, Democrats say yes, absolutely.
There is no congressional authorization on the books that would authorize this military action.
As for Republicans, here's what they say.
With respect to abiding by Congress and the rule of law, that's something the administration will, of course, always do.
So back to the rule book. Here's how it breaks down. The president is commander-in-chief. That is in Article 2 of the Constitution, which gives him broad interpretations of national defense. Our presidents have launched conflicts in multiple countries under that defense for decades, citing the need for rapid response. But there is a caveat here, the War Powers Resolution. Cast your mind back to the Vietnam War and President Nixon. It was passed in 1973 to curb presidential power after concerns he had overreached. Now, it requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops, and it limits deployments to 60 days. The president can extend by another 30. That is generally a buffer, so US troops can withdraw safely. Which means President Trump has until May 1st, and then Congress has to act. Now, remember, the war is not popular, but the House is controlled by his party, the Republicans. The rules are in black and white. Whether they'll be followed to the letter and the spirit, well, that is another matter. Phil Lavelle, Al Jazeera, Washington.
And here's what's been happening in the U.S. Congress. Since the U.S. started attacking Iran back in late February, there have been 6 votes in total on the War Powers Resolution that Phil just explained. That's the resolution to block the president's authority to wage war without formal congressional approval. So there were 4 votes in the Senate, 2 in the House. All of them have failed. So Congress has not voted so far to tie the president's hands. But here's what's interesting politically. There has been a significant shift in voting patterns, not in the Senate, but in the House. Look at the House. The first resolution failed by 7 votes at the beginning of March. So Republicans essentially had a buffer of 7 votes. The most recent resolution, however, just last Thursday, failed by just 1. The buffer has almost disappeared. Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna is at the White House. Patty Culhane is on Capitol Hill. So, Patty, just how significant is this shift, if that's the right thing to call it, this apparent shift in the center, the political center of gravity in Congress?
Well, it's very important, and there are signs that Republicans are going to be under even more pressure to potentially buck the president. Just to give you one example, the Cook Political Report, which is a nonpartisan, highly respected organization, they just recently moved 4 Senate seats towards the Democratic candidates. Some of those seats were, quite frankly, a surprise because they seemed safely Republican. Now, Republicans in the Senate always thought they had advantage going into these midterms. The map favors them. But it does show that the public's mood is shifting. And again, this all goes back to gas prices. It is impossible to drive anywhere from point A to point B in this country, usually without passing a gas station. And what do you see at those gas stations? You see very large signs with big neon numbers that change. So even if you're not filling up your gas tank every day, you're seeing signs of how much more it costs. Donald Trump came to office promising $2 a gallon of gas. It has now jumped by more than $1 since this war started. The average across the country is about $4. It's much higher in some places. So that's a pressure point for Republicans, and they have more leverage. We do expect the Senate's going to vote on the War Powers Resolution sometime today. Nobody seems to really know when. We'll be watching that closely. The other thing to watch is when the Trump administration comes to Congress and asks for $200 billion to help fund this war. We've already heard from one Republican senator that he's not going to rubber stamp it. And that was Senator Tom Tillis speaking to NBC News Now.
Now, if you're asking me to cast a vote for $200 billion supplemental or whatever the number is, I have to have details. I don't rubber stamp a generic request for for a fifth of $1 trillion without details. Need to know time, place, how it's going to be executed.
Just for some perspective, Senator Tom Tillis angered the president quite a bit and decided not to run for re-election. And we're hearing mixed messages about how long this is going to last. The Trump energy secretary said gas prices could be this high into next year. Other administrations, including the president, quickly came out and said he is wrong. So was he wrong? Was he right? Well, that answer is likely going to have a huge impact on the midterms.
Let's go to the White House. Mike, you just heard Patty's reporting there that Republicans, at least some of them, are getting jittery about this Iran war, where it's going, what it's going to mean for them politically 6 months ahead of an election. But the U.S. president is not on the ballot. How much does he have to worry about this? How much does he have to care about his party's concerns?
Well, as the leader of the Republican Party, he obviously has to care deeply about what those election results are likely to be. Then, as a president, he would not like to see Democrats gain control of the House or indeed of the Senate, because that would impede his own agenda, the things that he wants to put in place. If that is not an easy passage through Congress, then that are major problems for him. So although he's not on the ballot, what is on the ballot is his ability to govern effectively and to be able to govern without the restrictions of a hostile Congress. So it is deeply important for him to win these midterm elections, for the Republicans to win these midterm elections, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult for him to continue to basically implement the agenda that he wants to. And it is for this reason that we see him concerned, it would appear, about those midterm elections. Even during the conflict that has been ongoing, the president has maintained his campaign meetings. He's been traveling around various parts of the country, whipping up the crowd crowds, pushing the policies of the Republican Party and indeed of his own administration, but most of all insisting that he is doing well, his administration is doing well. This is contrary, according to most observers, to every bit of evidence that we're seeing, rising costs, particularly in the light of this ongoing conflict, which is truly driving up the daily cost of living, and that is something that Americans do not like.
Mike Hanna reporting from the White House. Al Jazeera's Patty Culhane on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much to both of you. Now, the uncertainty over when the war will end is testing Republican loyalty to President Trump in the Capitol. We've just been discussing that. It's also complicating the path for approval of the president's record $1.5 trillion defense budget. John Holman reports from Washington.
The US corridors of power haven't been looking so powerful since this conflict began. Congress has been unable to stop President Trump's war on Iran. That's because Republican lawmakers have repeatedly voted against it. Democrats are angry, pledging to call for a fresh vote every week until that changes.
And if Republicans block it, we will vote again and again and again until this war ends.
But things are shifting. Even Republicans in these hallways, although reluctant to break with Trump, are beginning to talk about a federal law that says the president must get approval from Congress if the war lasts longer than 60 days. That's now just over a week away.
He's within that 60-day window, and my hope is by the time we reach the end of that 60 days, this conflict will be over.
But the president hasn't exactly been keen on letting Congress know what's going on. When the White House budget director came here, he wouldn't even give lawmakers a ballpark figure on how much this is costing or will cost, saying it fluctuates. But soon the White House will have to ask Congress for $1.5 trillion for the 2027 military budget. That could face a difficult road in the two chambers, especially as lawmakers are already nervously eyeing a growing affordability crisis ahead of the midterm elections. Meanwhile, this week, Army veterans staged a protest in the Capitol to demand that their representatives step up.
They have that power to stop Trump's recklessness. They have that power, and I don't understand what in the world are they doing.
Their presence is a reminder that this is not just about high politics or even high living costs. What Congress does or doesn't do will affect lives, US military ones, and in much greater number, Iranians too. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Washington.
So let's bring in our panel today. It's a first actually for both of you on This is America, so thank you so much for coming. Roger Fisk, former Democratic Party strategist, Barack Obama campaign advisor. Rob Arlett is a Republican strategist, former Trump campaign state chair. That was in Delaware, right? In Delaware. And you're also a candidate for the U.S. Senate in Delaware.
Formerly.
Formerly.
Yes.
How much harder, we're 6 months ahead of the midterms, how much harder does this Iran war make it for Republicans running for office?
We're going to find out, I think, in November. But I would say today, as I've been sharing on your network and many others, that I think that the majority of the American people, specifically the Republicans, have supported President Trump in this effort. Because for decades, the regime has done what they've been doing, and no former U.S. president ever had the courage, perhaps, to do anything about it until President Trump. With that being said,
yeah, that wasn't quite my question.
With that being said,
my question
exactly.
is how much harder, is it harder to run for office in this environment when you're a Republican?
It's not easy, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. I say that because we need to support national security. We need to support Americans. We need to support our safety and our security. But at the same time, for how long? So President Trump stated this war was going to be a war of weeks and not a war of months or get it dragged out. And so I've been sharing, if this war were to go on beyond April, meaning into May, into June, into the summer, it will be very, very, very problematic for President Trump and his support.
Roger Fisk, this war, 6 months before an election, it's a gift to Democrats, isn't it, at this point? Or is that overstating it?
I'm hesitant to ever call anything that has the capacity to bring harm and suffering to human beings as a gift.
I mean, purely in an electoral sense, of course.
Of course, I get it. It's to use Rob's phrase, it is a double-edged sword for the president, because in one sense, the economy is not doing well. Job production is weak. Then the prices, as we all know, and just as the piece before we came on was about the gas prices and things like that. But what the Iran war does for him on a day-to-day basis is it eats up a lot of media oxygen. And so if the war subsides, a lot of that scrutiny, a lot of that, what I call the daily American conversation, will come back to domestic issues, and that's not going to cut well for the president. So in a sense, this war is not going well either, but it does dominate a lot of the daily news conversation, and that is somewhat to his advantage. The question really is how long. We're hearing even earlier today that to demine the Straits of Hormuz could go up to 6 months. So that pushes us into October and November, when there could be incidences or ships being harmed by that. So I think this has much longer legs than we currently think right now. And I think no matter how it cuts in a very difficult direction for the incumbent president and the incumbent party.
Yeah, and the party is really what I'm concerned with today. It's hard to continue this conversation without having a few polling numbers, so let's go through those. How likely is the Iran war to have an effect on November's midterm elections? What do the polls say about that? So a recent poll by Marquette Law School asked voters to rank their critical issues, the issues that matter most to them. For most voters, the biggest concern is cost of living. 20% chose the war, followed by immigration and the economy. In a different poll, Ipsos asked voters if U.S. military action in Iran had affected their personal financial situations. More than half of respondents said that it did. And that Ipsos poll asked people if they thought gas prices would get better or worse in the next year. Robert was just telling us this has long legs, probably. 63% of respondents said they expected prices to keep rising. And the American public's view generally of Congress, we mentioned that, is at or near all-time lows. Just 10% of people surveyed in the last, this is a Gallup poll this time, said that they approved of how it was handling its job. 86% disapproved. The data shows the decline is being driven by Republican voters. Last March, 63% of them approved of what Congress was doing. Now, that number has dropped to just 20% support. Rob Arlett, back to you. The campaign trail. What kind of discussions, or pre-campaign trail, what kind of discussions are Republicans getting, congressmen, congresswomen, senators, when they go back to their constituencies? What kind of questions from the public are they having to face right now?
Well, they're getting a lot of questions. I would tell you that, as you know, I shared that I ran for the U.S. Senate back in 2018 in Delaware. And people, when you're out campaigning, you are grassroots. You are connecting with the voters one-on-one and in small groups and even sometimes bigger groups. And the questions are going to be really quite simple based on the polling, and that is it's all about the economy. It's all about the personal economy. What's happening at the kitchen table, as my friend had mentioned, it's all about the personal economy for each family. And people are not happy right now, well, because gas prices are up. They're actually currently today, they have exceeded the gas prices when President Biden had left office. So again, but I think people would give some grace to President Trump, knowing it's directly tied to the war and the disruption of oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. But again, if it gets dragged out, it's going to be very problematic for President Trump.
But that's the whole thing. It is tied to the war. So people will be weighing the impact on their finances versus the benefits that they get out of this war. Are Americans, this is for both of you, are Americans seeing benefits from this war at this point? I recognize it's early, 7 weeks in, but do they see benefits?
Well, I would say no, not at the moment. And I'll put on my military background. I was a former military intelligence, Navy military intelligence background. And so I would say, as of today, the answer to that would be no, in my opinion.
So it's a net negative for them?
Today. I think people are investing and are planning and hoping that this will be a successful conflict, meaning that the regime will not have access to nuclear weaponry, open up that Strait of Hormuz, and stop the proxy bombing and stop the proxy killing of the American people. If President Trump can do that relatively quickly in the next, I would say, 30 to 60 days, I think all's going to be okay come November. But if it gets dragged out and there's not definitivity and clarity in what I've just shared, President Trump will have a problem, and all Republicans running come November will also have a challenge.
Roger Fisk, how do the Democrats capitalize on this?
every candidate of either party or in either chamber, no matter what they're running for, has to start with a blank piece of paper and write down exactly who they are, what they want to do, how they intend to win their election, and how they intend to contribute to the future of their constituents. What the Democrats, and this is a long way of saying what the Democrats cannot do, is expect that President Trump's stumbles, domestic or international, are just going to deliver this for them. I'm not shocked to hear the low poll numbers. I don't think those poll numbers for Congress are ever going to change, like for at least the course of the rest of our lives.
Not until you and I get in there.
Exactly. Then we'll then we'll turn it around. But the Democrats need to go out and just explain in a very plain, direct way, not only how their agenda is going to help people, but also in very targeted ways. Take, for example, farmers in Nebraska and Iowa and Ohio, and what is going on with the prices around things like aluminum and pesticides and things like that are actually being impacted by what's going on in the Middle East. We would normally get most of our aluminum from Canada, but that door's been closed because of the antagonism of this administration. Some of our aluminum comes from the Middle East. And so for farmers who need the fertilizer and things like that they get out of the Strait of Hormuz, to your question to Rob, that's a very direct impact, because in many situations for them, not only has the gas gone up for their farm equipment, but the price of fertilizers have gone up by 50%. And that's with no soybean orders coming from China because of that whole dynamic. So in some parts of this country, the day-to-day impacts of this, I think, are very, very real.
Rob Bartlett, the spirit of the U.S. Constitution is that Congress has a say, more than a say, in declaring war. At a bare minimum, it is the collective judgment of Congress and the president, right, that should be involved in declaring war. Do voters, but that is process, that is constitutional law, that is like the whole political side of it. Do voters care about that?
Well, it depends on what side of the aisle they are on. I say that is because today Democrats are, well, I would call crying wolf with President Trump and the Republicans, because they say this is an unauthorized war. That's what the Democrats are saying. However, I think, my dear friends, and I'm sure Roger's not one of these, but I'm sure that my Democrat friends have all forgotten that no president or Congress, I should say, has actually officially declared war in this country since World War II. Since the 1940s, Congress has never officially declared war on any country since the 1940s. Think about that. That's including the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Iraq War, and the Afghanistan War. All of those wars, or one could say conflicts, were never declared official and legal wars by Congress, but yet they still occurred. So Democrats, again, have selective memories when it comes to this. At the same time, I think because the razor-thin margin of a majority that the Republicans have is very, very close, and that's why the pressure is even more so on the Republicans and President Trump to deliver, because of that narrow threat.
There's a but, right? There's a counter to that. And Roger, I meant to ask you about this. So when Barack Obama was considering military action against Syria for having used chemical weapons on their own people, he was hesitant, I think it's fair to say. He put it to a vote in Congress. Congress said, no, we don't want to do this. Barack Obama did not go to war, did not use military action against Syria in that context. So that is an example of a U.S. president bringing Congress into his wartime decisions. Roger, do you have any insight into that decision, how it was made? This idea of, like, let's bring in Congress.
I think the president at the time, President Obama, realized that what you want to do going into a conflict like this, and there were plenty of other examples with drone strikes and extraditions from this country where he was comfortable moving forward, but where possible, you do it ideally with Congress, ideally with the support of the American people, but also with our allies. And I think what the current administration is now experiencing, when they turn around and they expect kind of our allies to join them in deconflicting the strait, for example, when they weren't consulted to begin with, when this administration has spent the last year and a half insulting our allies, and by that I mean specifically the Western democracies. Presidents gravitate towards foreign policy in their second terms because they have more mobility to move within some of these emergency declarations and some of the things that your questions are based on. But they're very ill-advised when they move independently. Because now the president has gone out without allies. He's gone out with the American people and started this with the foundational message to the American people being that we started a war to prevent a war, but it's not really a war, but it's been a war for 47 years. And once you have that very shaky kind of ruptured foundation of a justification, then from there on out, you're just setting in motion things that are not going to be broadly supported because he didn't solicit that support at the beginning. And the justifications, as we've already seen up through including this morning, shift weekly, if not daily.
Roger Fisk, former Democratic Party strategist, Barack Obama campaign advisor, thank you very much. Rob Arlett, Republican strategist, former Trump campaign state chair in Delaware. Thank you very much to both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
The debate on Capitol Hill has spilled over into the online arena, as it often does. Republicans, Democrats sparring verbally in the Senate and the House over Iran, continuing after hours on social media. Alex Baird has been following the to and fro. He has this report from Capitol Hill.
So behind me in the Senate chamber last week, Democrats once again tried to rein in Trump's war powers. But for a fourth time, Republicans said no. That failed resolution had been pushed by Democrat Tammy Duckworth. She's now calling out her GOP colleagues as cowards who are putting Trump's ego first. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is pledging to push that resolution every single week. But back on the Republican side, there's a call for loyalty. House Republican Mike Lawler says to restrict Trump's ability to defend the country is dangerous. After all, he is commander-in-chief. Congressman Thomas Massie is widely seen as an offside Republican. He's now being accused by some of being with the enemy. Russell Fry says, yes, Congress does have a role, but the US must lead with strength, while Democrats are being accused of opposing the president at every single turn. Whatever the side of the aisle, it's clear the Congress is refusing at this point to limit the president's powers.
Alex Baird there, and that is it from the team in Washington, looking at the new reality for the Republican Party nearly 2 months into the war with Iran. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the U.S. and influence the world. For now, back to Al Jazeera's headquarters in Doha.